46 billion CFA francs. That is how much Burkina Faso says it spent staging its national team's home matches outside the country after its largest stadium failed international standards. Renovating that stadium cost roughly 15 billion. Now Ibrahim Traoré has reopened it, launched a sports academy program, installed a new arena floor, and pushed forward another 15,000-seat stadium, even as the country faces a severe security crisis. To supporters, this is sovereignty built in concrete. To critics, it is money Burkina Faso cannot afford to lock inside stadium walls. But both sides may be missing the real story. Who builds these projects? Who controls the contracts? And will the money, skills, and opportunities remain in Burkina Faso after the crowds go home? To understand why 46 billion CFA matters, imagine a national team that cannot truly play at home. In 2021, the Confederation of African Football suspended Stade du Quatre Août from hosting international matches after the facility failed to meet required standards. Burkina Faso's largest stadium was still standing, but for international football, it was effectively unusable. The national team had to receive opponents outside the country. That meant renting foreign stadiums, transporting players and officials, arranging accommodation, moving equipment, and surrendering the economic activity that a home match normally creates. According to figures presented by Burkina Faso's sports ministry, those relocated matches cost more than 46 billion CFA francs between 2020 and 2025. That number does not mean 46 billion was stolen or simply thrown away. Matches still took place. Players still competed, but the money was spent because Burkina Faso lacked an internationally approved venue of its own. For an American viewer, imagine the United States repeatedly paying to stage its home games in another country because its national stadium could not pass inspection. The embarrassment would be obvious. So would the recurring financial cost. Now compare that with the renovation. In September 2021, Burkina Faso's government approved an initial renovation contract worth approximately 15 billion CFA francs, financed through the state budget. The comparison is striking. The reported cost of playing abroad was roughly 3 times the initial renovation contract. That comparison does not prove every renovation expense was efficient. It does, however, explain why officials could frame the project not merely as prestige spending, but as an effort to replace a recurring external cost with a domestic asset. But there is an important detail that political storytelling often removes. The renovation did not begin with Ibrahim Traoré. The contract was approved before he took power in 2022. What Traoré inherited was an unfinished project, repeated delays, growing public frustration, and a national symbol that remained closed. That distinction matters. He should not receive credit for starting the project, but his government can be evaluated on whether it finally delivered the result. After additional work and inspections, CAF lifted the stadium's suspension in July 2025. 1 month later, on August 4th, the gates reopened for a major public ceremony. African football legends including Samuel Eto'o, Emmanuel Adebayor, JJ Okocha, and El Hadji Diouf entered a stadium filled with supporters. Eto'o scored the first goal of the reopening gala, which ended 1-1. Their participation created a powerful pan-African image. But appearing at a football event is not the same as formally endorsing Traoré's government. The verified fact is that they attended and played. Any wider political meaning is interpretation. The more important proof came after the celebration. Burkina Faso's national team returned to the stadium for competitive matches. In September 2025, the team held Egypt to a scoreless draw in World Cup qualifying. A month later, Burkina Faso defeated Ethiopia 3-1 on the same ground. The stadium was no longer only a stage for speeches. It was performing its basic function again. And if you believe African development stories deserve both pride and proof, subscribe and tell us whether you are watching from Africa, the diaspora, Europe, or the United States. So the first verdict is measurable. Reopening Stade du Quatre Août reduced the need to export future home matches. It restored a national venue and gave supporters something that had been missing for years: the ability to watch their own team at home. But that does not settle the larger argument. A repaired stadium can stop one form of financial leakage. It can also become a permanent maintenance burden if the system behind it remains weak. And Traore did not stop with one reopening. His government moved forward with another 15,000-seat stadium, a national academy program, and new indoor sports infrastructure. Why build an entire network when Burkina Faso had only just recovered its main stadium? Because the real project may not be a stadium at all. It may be an attempt to build a national sports system. A national sports system is not defined by how many buildings appear on camera. It is defined by what connects them: contractors, engineers, components, coaches, inspections, maintenance, and a continuing budget. That hidden network becomes visible at Léguéma, roughly 15 kilometers from Bobo Dioulasso. The new stadium is designed for approximately 15,000 spectators. By June 2026, officials reported that the main stadium bowl was more than 90% complete, while broader reporting placed the overall project closer to 85%. That difference matters. A nearly completed bowl is not the same as an operational stadium. The pitch lighting, utilities, security systems, access routes, and final certification must work together before international competition can begin. And Léguéma reveals a second contradiction. It is presented as part of Burkina Faso's push for national capability, but the main contractor is Turkey's Integral Group. Prefabricated structural components have also been shipped from Turkey. Local reporting said approximately 80% of workers on the site were Burkinabe. That creates wages and experience. But employment is not automatically technology transfer. The deeper test is whether Burkinabe engineers are learning to design, inspect, repair, and eventually reproduce these systems without permanent dependence on an outside contractor. Who owns the technical plans? Who can replace specialized components 10 years from now? International partnerships are not evidence of failure. American and European infrastructure also relies on global contractors, materials, and supply chains. Self-reliance does not require isolation. It requires using a partnership to increase domestic capability and bargaining power. Otherwise, one dependency may simply be replaced by another. The sources reviewed for this video established the stadium's size, contractor construction progress, and imported components. But they do not establish a clearly documented final cost or prove the broader claim that no foreign financing was involved. Until those details are publicly demonstrated, they should remain questions, not conclusions. The second project is smaller but symbolically powerful. In June 2026, the government inaugurated a new multisport floor inside the existing Palais de Sports Ouaga 2000. It upgraded an existing arena. It was not a new stadium. The floor covers approximately 2,241 square meters and uses densified, multi-layer bamboo. Its reported cost was approximately 211 million CFA francs, financed through the Bondo National Support Fund. The material creates an attractive story: an African country using bamboo instead of continuing to depend on conventional sports flooring. But the most dramatic version goes beyond the available evidence. Public reporting reviewed for this video does not clearly establish that the bamboo was grown, processed, and manufactured entirely inside Burkina Faso. That does not make the project meaningless. It means the honest question is not simply, is the floor made from bamboo? The real question is, how much of its value chain remains inside the country? Where was it grown and processed? Who can repair damaged panels? Are replacements available locally? Can Burkinabe companies eventually manufacture the same product for schools, arenas, or export? If the answers are local, the floor could represent the beginning of a small industrial chain. If they are not, it remains an imported product with a powerful national story attached to it. The third layer is the most important for ordinary families. In 2025, the government launched a presidential program intended to create 13 sports academies across the country's then 13 regions. The announced budget was approximately 8 billion CFA francs, with the first construction phase covering 5 locations. Again, launched does not mean completed. A building can be announced or placed under construction without yet producing a single trained athlete. For these academies to become a true pipeline, they need coaches, equipment, nutrition, safe transportation, transparent selection links with schools and clubs, and recurring operating budgets. Now the structure of Traore's sports strategy becomes clearer. Stade du Quatre Ouaga is the national stage. Léguéma expands geographic capacity. Ouaga 2000 supports indoor competition. The academies are supposed to create the next generation of athletes. Together they could form something larger than a collection of buildings, but only if the connections work. A stadium without maintenance becomes a future renovation bill. An academy without coaches becomes an empty building. A specialized floor without replacement materials may become unusable after serious damage. This is why sovereignty cannot be measured by concrete alone. It must be measured by who supplies the system, who learns from it, and who can keep it operating. And even if Burkina Faso successfully builds that system, one question remains unanswered. Who receives access first? The national team, urban elites, private clubs, or young people across the country who were told these projects were being built for them? That question changes the debate from construction to allocation. Burkina Faso does not have unlimited money. Every CFA franc committed to sports is unavailable for another priority. In a country facing a severe security crisis, the needs are impossible to ignore. Military operations, roads, clinics, classrooms, clean water, displaced families, and functioning public services. This is the strongest argument against Traore's sports campaign. A full stadium creates an emotional, national image, but it does not treat a patient, repair a rural road, or bring water closer to a village. Critics can reasonably ask whether new sports facilities should come before more urgent needs. But the strongest argument for the program is important. Burkina Faso has already experienced the cost of not maintaining its infrastructure. The national team's relocated matches reportedly cost more than 46 billion CFA francs. The initial Stade du Quatre Ouaga renovation contract was roughly 15 billion. So refusing to invest did not preserve public money. In that case, institutional failure created a different expense, one that sent matches supporters and economic activity outside the country. The real choice is therefore not simply stadiums or hospitals. It is whether a project reduces a recurring cost, creates a useful public asset, and produces enough social value to justify the money committed to it. The same debate appears in the United States and Europe when cities help finance arenas. Supporters promise jobs in urban development. Critics warn that taxpayers may carry the cost while private organizations capture the best benefits. The logo changes. The questions do not. Who pays? Who earns? Who gets through the gate? For Burkina Faso, the first allocation test is geography. Stade du Quatre Ouaga and Ouaga 2000 are in the capital. Léguéma is near Bobo Dioulasso. Those investments create 2 major centers, but a national strategy cannot end in 2 cities. The Academy program was supposed to spread facilities across the regions. Yet the first phase covers only 5 locations, and the wider network remains under construction. Until the academies are operating, regional access remains a promise rather than a completed outcome. The second test is hierarchy. Elite athletes bring flags and international attention, but a sports system becomes socially broad only when ordinary children can enter it before they become elite. Consider a 14-year-old girl living far from Ouagadougou. A renovated national stadium may inspire her, but inspiration is not access. Access means a safe place to train, an available coach, affordable transportation, equipment, regular competition, and a selection process that does not depend on family wealth or political connections. If even one link is missing, the pathway can close before her talent is discovered. The third test is price. Will community groups and local clubs use these facilities at affordable rates? Or will electricity security, cleaning, and maintenance costs push managers toward private events and higher fees. A publicly financed facility can still become inaccessible to the public. The fourth test is gender and inclusion. How many academy places will go to girls? Will women's teams receive desirable training hours or only the time remaining after men's programs? Will athletes with disabilities be included? Announcing a national program is easier than publishing those numbers. The fifth test is time. Construction creates immediate visual proof. Machines move, concrete rises, officials visit, and cameras record progress. The deeper benefits arrive slowly. Coaches need training. Competitions need organization. Equipment needs replacement. Athletes may need years to develop. A government receives credit for opening the building today, while a future government may inherit the maintenance bill tomorrow. Tour du Faso and FESPACO show that Burkina Faso can attract international participation. But one protected event does not prove nationwide security, and a crowded ceremony does not show whether economic benefits reach ordinary households. The correct measurement begins after the flags are lowered. How many local vendors earned income? How many workers kept permanent jobs? How many young athletes trained during the following year? How many days did the venue remain active instead of empty? Those are allocation questions. And allocation is never neutral. Officials choose the city. Ministries approve the budget. Contractors receive the work. Federations influence schedules. Managers decide prices. Coaches select athletes. Each decision creates a gatekeeper. If the process is transparent, those gatekeepers can build a public system. If it is captured, the same projects can direct public money toward a narrow network of insiders. And in the history of Stade du 4 Août, there is already a warning. Behind the triumphant reopening lies a procurement case involving allegations of fraud, inflated costs, and falsified documents. The stadium may be open, but the struggle over who controls the system has only begun. Concrete does not steal public money. Systems do. When Stade du 4 Août reopened under bright lights, the images suggested that a long national failure had finally been corrected. But behind that celebration was a legal file. In January 2025, Burkina Faso's public prosecutor announced that 4 individuals and 2 legal entities had been placed under formal investigation in the case surrounding the stadium's earlier procurement process. The alleged offenses included public procurement fraud, overbilling, and falsified written records. Those are allegations, not convictions. The available public sources reviewed for this video do not establish a final guilty verdict, and every accused person remains entitled to due process. The case also does not prove that the completed stadium, the Léguéma project, or the wider sports strategy is corrupt. But it reveals why the next stage matters. Transparency versus capture. Imagine the first future. Every major contract is published. Citizens can see the original price the contractor due, the deadline, every change order, and the reason costs increased. Independent inspectors verify construction quality. Maintenance budgets appear before the opening ceremony. Officials report how many local workers were hired, what skills they received, and which components were imported. Academy places are announced publicly. Selection criteria are clear. Girls, rural athletes, and families without political connections can see how decisions are made. In that future, infrastructure creates more than buildings. It creates trust. Now imagine the second future. The language of sovereignty becomes a shield around the contract. A politically connected company wins the work. Imported components are presented as domestic achievement. Costs rise without explanation. Completion percentages are repeated, but independent inspection remains difficult. The public sees the ribbon cutting. Insiders see the payment schedule. After opening, premium events receive priority. Community access becomes expensive. Maintenance contracts generate another protected stream of public money. Coaches and administrators decide which young athletes enter the system with few published rules. The facility remains publicly owned, but the value around it is captured privately. This risk is not uniquely African. Cities in the United States and Europe also face disputes over stadium subsidies, construction overruns, private revenue, and public maintenance costs. The deeper problem is concentrated discretion. A ministry chooses the project. Procurement officials control the tender. Contractors choose suppliers and subcontractors. Federations influence the calendar. Stadium managers control prices and access. Coaches control the pathway to elite competition. Gatekeepers are necessary. But when decisions are hidden, the public cannot distinguish efficiency from favoritism. That distinction matters under a powerful leader. Centralized authority can accelerate construction. It can break through years of delay and force agencies to deliver. But speed also creates pressure to reduce consultation, weaken independent review, or treat criticism as opposition to national progress. A patriotic project should not require blind trust. It should survive inspection. That is the real meaning of transparency, not endless speeches, not a government website filled only with ceremonies, not a single corruption arrest presented as proof that the entire system is clean. Transparency means giving the public enough information to test the claim. What was promised? What was paid? What was delivered? Who benefited? And who is responsible when the system fails? Traore's self-reliance project will be judged partly by whether control moves away from foreign dependency. But if contracts, access, and maintenance are captured by a narrow domestic network, Burkina Faso may only exchange one group of gatekeepers for another. The flag above the system would change. The structure underneath it would remain. So how can viewers distinguish sovereignty from spectacle before another stadium begins to decay? The answer is not another slogan. It is a set of mechanisms, documents, budgets, inspections, training, targets, access rules, and performance numbers that can be checked long after the cameras leave. If transparency is the difference between sovereignty and capture, what should the public actually demand? Not another promise, a mechanism. The first mechanism is a public project ledger. For every major facility, one page should show the approved budget, source of financing, contractor, subcontractors, completion deadline, imported components, and every later change to cost or schedule. Cost increases may be legitimate, but the explanation should be visible. The second mechanism is a maintenance reserve. Stade du 4 août demonstrates what happens when maintenance failure is allowed to accumulate. The building remains visible, but its useful function disappears. Then the country pays twice, once for the original asset and again for emergency rehabilitation or foreign alternatives. Before Léguéma opens, officials should know who will maintain the pitch lighting, drainage seats, security systems, and changing rooms. The budget should identify expected annual costs, inspection intervals, spare part suppliers, and the agency responsible when repairs are delayed. A ribbon should never be cut before a maintenance plan exists. The third mechanism is measurable technology transfer. Reporting that 80% of workers are Burkinabe is useful, but it measures participation during construction. It does not reveal what capability remains afterward. A stronger contract would state how many local engineers, electricians, groundskeepers, safety specialists, and facility managers must be trained and certified before the foreign contractor leaves. It would require technical manuals, digital plans, warranties, and repair procedures to remain inside Burkina Faso. If local companies can source, manufacture, install, and replace the material, the project may create a domestic industry. If replacement panels must always be imported, the dependency remains hidden beneath a different surface. The fourth mechanism is a public access charter. Every publicly financed venue should publish its fees, community hours, academy selection rules, and allocation of training time. How many hours go to national teams? How many to local clubs? How many to women's programs, schools, athletes with disabilities, and communities outside the political center? Access should not depend on knowing the right official. For the academies, applicants need clear age requirements, selection tests, appeal procedures, safeguarding rules, and information about food, housing, education, and transport. Talent identification becomes credible only when families understand the path into the system. The fifth mechanism is an annual performance scoreboard. Do not measure success only by the percentage of concrete completed. Measure how the asset performs. How many days was the venue active? How many sporting and cultural events did it host? How much revenue did it generate? How much did maintenance cost? How long was it closed? How many permanent jobs remained after construction? How many athletes entered academies? And how many were girls? What percentage of procurement spending reached Burkina Faso companies? These numbers would allow supporters to demonstrate progress and critics to identify failure before another crisis develops. They would also make comparisons with American and European stadium projects more meaningful. The standard would no longer be whether one country appears richer or more modern. The standard would be whether public investment produces durable public value. These mechanisms are not designed to weaken Traore's self-reliance agenda. They would make it harder to reverse. A project built around one leader's urgency can move quickly. A project protected by published rules, trained workers, recurring budgets, and measurable results can survive leadership changes. That is the difference between a campaign and an institution. A campaign depends on momentum. An institution continues when the crowd disappears, the minister changes, and the cameras move to the next project. But even the best designed institution still has to answer one final test. Does it change ordinary life? To find that answer, we have to leave the presidential ceremony, walk past the stadium gates, and look at the people living and working outside them. Here, infrastructure stops being a national symbol and becomes a possible income opportunity or public expense. Begin with the construction worker at Léguéma. Local reporting said 80% of the site's workforce was Burkina Faso. During construction, that means wages entering local households and experience gained on a project. But the ordinary life test begins when construction ends. Does the worker leave with a certificate, a permanent job and skills that another employer will pay for? Or does the income disappear when the foreign contractor leaves? Now consider the small businesses around Stade du 4 août. A home match can bring customers to vendors, drivers, cleaning, security workers, printers, hotels, and transport operators. Some activity moved outside Burkina Faso when home matches were staged abroad. Bringing matches home can return part of the event economy to local streets. But one crowded night is not an industry. If the stadium hosts only a few important matches each year, the income will be temporary and unpredictable. The venue needs a calendar of football, athletics, cultural events, school competitions, and community use. Utilization turns concrete into economic activity. An empty stadium turns economic activity back into maintenance cost. The third person is the young athlete. For a child far from Ouagadougou, the national stadium may exist mainly on television. That is why the Academy network matters more to ordinary life than the spectacular stadium. If an academy opens near a regional community, it could reduce travel distance, identify talent earlier, and create work for coaches, drivers, medical staff, and administrators. But families need more than a building. They need to know whether attendance is free, whether equipment is provided, whether children remain in school, whether transportation is safe, and whether selection is based on ability. A family should not have to choose between education and a distant promise of professional sport. The fourth person is the girl who wants to compete. National pride often centers on men's football because it produces the largest crowds and the most visible images. But public investment should widen opportunity. If girls receive few academy places, poor training hours, or no safe accommodation, then half the country's talent remains outside the system. The same applies to athletes with disabilities and children from families unable to pay fees. Inclusion is not a ceremonial photograph. It is a published number. How many entered? How many stayed? How many completed school? How many advanced? And how many were quietly excluded? There is also an intangible benefit that spreadsheets cannot fully measure. During a security crisis, a national team playing at home can give people a shared national experience. That sense of belonging has value. African American communities understand this power. Sports institutions have often provided spaces for identity, excellence, collective pride and visibility, even when wider systems remained unequal. But symbolism becomes dangerous when it is used to silence material questions. National pride does not cancel the need for water security, healthcare, or accountable government. It should strengthen the public's belief that national institutions can deliver all of them. So the ordinary life verdict should use a simple test. Did local workers keep valuable skills? Did businesses earn recurring income? Did families gain affordable access? Did girls and rural athletes receive real opportunities? Did the venue remain active without draining other public services? If the answers improve year after year, the sports strategy can become part of national development. If the answers remain hidden, the public will be left with impressive images and very little evidence. That brings us to the final verdict. What has Traore's government actually delivered? What remains unproven? And what must happen before these stadiums can be called a lasting act of sovereignty rather than an expensive political moment? The first layer is what has been delivered. Stade du 4 Août has been renovated, received international approval, and is hosting competitive matches again. With relocated matches reportedly costing over 46 billion CFA against an initial renovation contract near 15 billion, restoring it had a clear economic logic. Ouaga 2000 has a new floor, Léguéma nears completion, and a regional academy program has been launched. These projects are real. But the second layer is what remains unproven. The available evidence does not establish that gold revenue directly financed every sports project. It does not prove that the wider program used no foreign financing. It does not confirm that the bamboo was grown and processed inside Burkina Faso. 13 academies have not yet been demonstrated as fully completed and operational. Local employment at Léguéma does not yet prove permanent technology transfer. And new buildings do not automatically prove affordable nationwide access. They should not be declared true before the evidence exists. The third layer is the test that comes next. Burkina Faso reported producing more than 94 tons of gold in 2025. Yet the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative reported that in 2024, the extractive sector generated nearly 70% of exports, while accounting for less than 1% of employment. That is the larger sovereignty problem. A country can export extraordinary mineral value without creating enough broad opportunity at home. Sports infrastructure will not solve that contradiction by itself, but it can become one small example of how resource wealth and public revenue might be converted into domestic capability if the system creates jobs, skills, events, youth pathways, and public access. Traore deserves credit for completing the reopening of a stadium that had become a costly national failure. His government also deserves scrutiny over contracts, maintenance access, and whether political speed is being matched by institutional protection. Results must be measured openly year after year. Support is not the same as surrendering the right to ask questions. Criticism is not the same as opposing African self-reliance. A serious Pan-African position requires both ambition and accountability, because sovereignty is not proven when a leader cuts a ribbon. It is proven when local workers can maintain the facility, young people can enter the system, citizens can inspect the spending, and the institution continues after the leader is gone. So what do you see here? A necessary investment in national capability, or a powerful political symbol whose long-term cost has not yet been revealed? Share your verdict respectfully, tell us what country you are watching from, and subscribe for more source-conscious analysis of Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, and Africa's pursuit of self-reliance. The most important stadium is not the concrete bowl. It is the system built around it. And that system is still being tested. Disclaimer, this video is fictional storytelling created for education, commentary, and entertainment. It is not a factual report or official information. Any similarities to real events are coincidental. Please enjoy it as creative content only.